Hello, my friends. In this video, we'll be taking a look at the results of Stone Age Hunter Gatherer from Ethiopia, Mota Hunter Gatherer from this location right here. Now, the Mota Hunter Gatherer is a Stone Age sample, and I say Stone Age, it means the Mesolithic period in the context of Ethiopian history. But this sample is actually, if you look at the time period where it's from, this sample lived 25 to 24 centuries before the Common Era, which is actually like the Bronze Age period in Europe. So it is the Stone Age for East Africa, but it is the Bronze Age for Europeans. And this sample is ancestral. It represents a cluster of hunter-gatherers who are ancestral to East Africans. So essentially, Somali, Ethiopians, Kenyans, Sudanese, they descend from this Mota Ethiopian hunter gatherer, and they also have some additional admixture from the Natufians of the Middle East as well. So let's get into the results of this Mota Ethiopian hunter gatherer. We're gonna start with admixture. So first, this is what this individual scores with Eurasian scale 13. It's scoring mostly Northeast African, 78% Northeast African, 16% Sub-Saharan, but Northeast African is also like a mixed component. In this context, it is more similar to Sub-Saharan African reference population than other like Middle Eastern or other reference populations. What's interesting, it's also scoring a little bit of Amerindian and Oceanian, and the oracle is modeling this individual as a mixture of Ethiopian plus Ethiopian, Ethiopian Gumus plus Ethiopian Ari cultivator. Very interesting mixture. So essentially, this individual is resembling Ethiopians, quite similar to Ethiopians and Somalis. Now let's look at the Enmonte oracle, and I actually made a little chart with a little pie chart based on the Enmonte oracle. So the pie chart, as you can see, is getting modeled mostly as a mixture of Ethiopian Gumus plus Ethiopian Ari cultivator, but there is a little bit of Hadza admixture here as well. So essentially, mostly East African, uh, not even mostly, entirely East African admixture. This individual is resembling modern East African groups. And now let's get into these results with Trait Predictor. So we're gonna start with Nashakot and what this individual scores for phenotype. So it looks like he has darkest brown eyes. By the way, his haplogroup is E1b, very common lineage for north of Africa, north and east of Africa. So his eye color is dark brown. His hair color is black. He has black hair. His skin color is most likely light brown at 66.2% likelihood, which is very interesting. So he's most likely got light brown skin and not even dark brown skin. It is typical for sub-Saharan Africans with my calculator to score dark brown skin, but he is scoring light brown skin instead. And he's got kinky hair at 98.4% likelihood. And he also has a snub-shaped nose, so he's most likely got so the phenotype has got dark brown eyes, black hair, light brown skin, kinky hair, and snub-shaped nose. All right. Now looking at the genotypes, he does have some light color variants in HERC2 actually, which is very very interesting. Kind of uncommon for sub-Saharan Africans to have light color variants in this gene. Um, and he does have some light color variants in here as well in OCA2. And even here, this is one of the variations in OCA2 where it's really uncommon for sub-Saharan Africans and non-Europeans in general to have light color variants. So this is really, really surprising. And he has one light color variant here in Asip. He doesn't have any light skin variants in SLC24A5. He does have one light skin variant in SLC45A2, which is very, very interesting. He's got two light color variants in SLC24A4, which also have to do with pigmentation of skin, also eyes and not hair. And okay, he's got two light color variants here in Keto G, which is also kind of uncommon for Africans. And he does not have any ginger variants in MC1R. All right. Now let's look at the phenotype oracle. What phenotypes is he going to be predicted to have? So the closest phenotypes to this sample are this, which is I'd say a West African phenotype rather than a East African one. But um, I'd say there is a very strong possibility he might indeed look like this, followed by this, followed by this, and he's getting modeled as a mixture of this plus this, By the way, in case you aren't picking up on the differences here, the phenotype here has a narrower nose shape than the phenotype here. So phenotype here is a narrow nose, phenotype here is a wider nose. So the second closest phenotype mixture is a mixture of phenotype this plus this. Once again, narrower nose plus narrower nose here. Phenotype mixture here, this plus this. Now, I'm not picking up on the difference between this phenotype and this phenotype. What's the difference here? There has to be a difference here as well, but I don't see it. Maybe the difference is in the bottom ones. Okay, and then there's a mixture here on the fourth mixture, which is lighter phenotypes, lighter sub-Saharan African phenotype plus darker sub-Saharan African phenotype, and last mixture, which is a Nilotic phenotype plus this phenotype. Very, very interesting. So essentially, he's quite black in terms of what he looks like. Um, and for the facial morphology oracle, he's scoring 100% sub-Saharan African. So he's definitely very black in terms of facial morphology. No trace of anything West Eurasian in terms of facial morphology, and he's scoring kinky hair and dark brown eyes. The only thing that's a little bit interesting about this result is the skin color prediction, because his skin color prediction is light brown, right? So that's a little bit interesting, because typical for blacks, what my trade predictor is dark brown skin. But anyway, let's close that. Okay, let's look at the biomarkers predisposition. Okay, so it looks like he has a predisposition to higher level of vitamin D, higher level of LDL, and lower level of HDL cholesterol, which is bad. These are bad predispositions. You want to have lower level of LDL and higher level of HDL cholesterol instead of this. So this is but it's not so bad. It's pretty close to the average. It's not really like horrible. Has a predisposition to higher level of glucose, which is also quite bad. Higher level of hemoglobin, which is okay. Higher blood pressure, okay. Lower level of iron in the blood, so he doesn't have hemochromatosis variants. Slightly lower level of sex hormone binding globulin in blood. Average level of red blood cell count in blood. Average telomere length, okay, that's pretty cool. And average height. All right, let's close that. Let's look at the polygenic risk scores and see what he's predisposed to. So he's got very high predisposition to kidney stones. Wow. Very high predisposition to arrhythmia and nodosum. He's got low predisposition to hemoglobin E disease. In fact, no risk variants for hemoglobin E disease found in the file. He's got very low predisposition to migraine. We're going to ignore that. He's got very low predisposition to gout. He's got low predisposition to eczema. Looks like he's got low predisposition to cataracts. Looks like he's got pretty high predisposition to age-related macular degeneration, AMD. I'm not sure what is the ethnic implications of this condition. I think it's most common in East Asians, but I'm not sure. He's got very high odds for rheumatoid arthritis. Now, rheumatoid arthritis is kind of a like white European condition, right? So it's very interesting that he's scoring so high for this. He's got lower odds for Tourette's, very high odds for epilepsy. Now, epilepsy I know is a condition that's most prevalent in sub-Saharan Africans. So this is a statistically, him scoring so high for epilepsy, statistically it makes sense being sub-Saharan African. He's scoring well. Does East African count as sub-Saharan? Write that in the comments. Do you think East African counts as sub-Saharan? Does Ethiopia count as sub-Saharan Africa? You write that in the comments. For asthma, I think he does because it's south of the Sahara, so I think it still does. For asthma, he's got average score. For leukemia, he's got higher than average score. For vitiligo, he's got higher than average predisposition. Vitiligo is also a condition that mostly affects that sub-Saharan Africans are predisposed to. He's got average score for myopia. He's got average score for corneal astigmatism. He's got average score for primary biliary cirrhosis. He's got below average score for stroke. And he's got very, very low score for male pattern hair loss. So he's definitely protected from male pattern hair loss. It is, in fact, one of the lowest scores I've ever seen for male pattern hair loss. So this individual is definitely protected from, the Norwood Reaper and going bald and losing their hair. So that's really cool. He's got a predisposition to lower odds of atrial fibrillation, lower odds of deep vein thrombosis, and lower odds of cardiovascular issues, which is also really cool. Also, lower odds of ADHD, and but higher odds of unipolar depression. Wow. So high odds of depression. Also high odds of bipolar type 1. Okay. Also slightly higher odds of schizophrenia. But I think for schizophrenia, we have to compare them to the sub-Saharan African results. So for sub-Saharan Africans, his result is actually not very high. So compared to sub-Saharan Africans, he's got pretty much below average predisposition to schizophrenia. So um, I'd say he's got an average predisposition to schizophrenia and a high predisposition to bipolar type 1. For type 2 diabetes, he's got a high predisposition, and for type 1 diabetes, he's got a below average predisposition. Now, that's quite typical as well for his ethnicity because type 2 diabetes is very common in sub Saharan Africans, and type 1 diabetes is very uncommon in sub Saharan Africans. Now, with Europeans, it's the reverse. Not that type 2 diabetes is very uncommon in Europeans. Type 2 diabetes is pretty common in Europeans as well. But type 1 diabetes is much, much more common in Europeans than in sub Saharan Africans or any other ethnicity, in fact. He's got high odds for Alzheimer's, and he's got low odds for multiple sclerosis. Okay, so that checks out. Ethnicity wise, that checks out. I'm not sure about Alzheimer's, where that's most common in, but for multiple sclerosis and type 1 diabetes, type 2 diabetes, ethnicity wise, that checks out. Let's look at the cancer section. He's got one risk variant for breast cancer at 24, so he's quite protected from breast cancer. He's got average odds for prostate cancer, average odds for glioma. So based on his average score for prostate cancer, we can assume that uh, he's probably got good result on the epithelial cancers panel, the 8Q24 panel. He's got average score for glioma, brain cancer, and he's got low odds of thyroid cancer. Pretty cool. Now, he does have 7 JAK2 variants out of 12 total found in the file for blood cancers, so he's quite predisposed to polycythemia vera. In case you were paying attention to the whole boogie to 9A thing that was going on recently, where it's a YouTuber that faked having like a blood cancer, and this YouTuber, it is essentially the blood cancer that he was faking. He was faking the genetic variant that predisposes people to have this blood cancer is JAK2. So I decided after I heard about this whole issue, I decided to add this JAK2 variant to my trait predictor. So that's why this is here. So this individual actually has polycythemia predisposition based on his JAK2 genotype. Now, good news, based on what I see here, he does not have a predisposition to testicular cancer. In fact, he has some protections from testicular cancer based on KIT-G genotype, which is really good to see. That's kind of typical for sub-Saharan Africans. Sub-Saharan Africans in general have protections from testicular cancer. No risk variance for celiac disease, no risk variance for GSS. Crohn's disease, he does have quite a lot of risk variance for that, but none of them are marked as important. So I think that's quite good. He's got no risk variance for Riefenstein's. He's got 1 risk variance for Parkinson's. Okay. He's got 2 risk variants for Gilbert syndrome, but they're quite common. And we don't see any other rare conditions that he's predisposed to. We see 1 rare allele for familiar thoracic aortic aneurysm. Wow. Okay. And we see 1 rare allele for Hirschsprung, and we see 1 rare allele for Fabry and for Li-Fraumeni. And what else is there? What else is there? There's also congenital insensitivity to pain. Yes, there is quite a couple of rare alleles that we see here, but I think that is because of miscalls and file quality. I think that's because it's issue with the file rather than I think those are issues with the file. Those are not genuine calls. Let's look at the allergies, by the way. I think I skipped over allergies. So for allergies, he's got 4 scans out of 28 total, which is very, very low. So he's definitely quite protected from allergies. That's also really cool to see. Okay, now let's go over the monogenic traits. And for monogenic traits, looks like he's predisposed to intermediate phenotype, intermediate dopamine levels, and the ability to tolerate stress. Now, that's kind of interesting that he's predisposed to intermediate phenotype instead of the warrior phenotype, because for sub-Saharan Africans, the warrior phenotype is definitely much more common. And if you look at the percentages, you see that the warrior phenotype is even a little bit more common, a little bit higher percent than the warrior phenotype in the result. If you look at some of the SNPs that he's scoring, he's got heterozygous genotype in common small maturation, and he's got TT here in MAOA, which is a warrior genotype in MAOA. He's got this other genotype in MAOA, which is a warrior genotype. I think if you go over these genotypes in COMT, MAOA, and MAOB, you're going to find a lot of warrior genotypes here. So it's kind of interesting that he's got so many warrior genotypes despite being a African, where these genotypes are really uncommon. So what's the predisposition? What does that mean in terms of his dopaminergic profile? Essentially, that means that unlike the rest of Africans who typically have warrior phenotype, for him, he's most likely intermediate in terms of his genetic phenotype, his dopaminergic phenotype. He's most likely got intermediate dopamine levels and ability to tolerate stress. So compared to the rest of Africans, who are mostly warriors, he's got lower ability to tolerate stress and higher dopamine levels. For D2 dopamine receptor sites, he's got higher number of dopamine D2 receptors, which is also quite typical for Africans. That's a typical score for anybody outside of Europe. And he does not have the A1 allele and TAC1. All right, that's pretty cool. This leads to higher odds for such conditions as bipolar and schizophrenia, but as we saw previously, he doesn't really score that high for these conditions. He doesn't have any variants for dwarfism. Did I miss anything else? No, not really. All right, he's got predisposition to intermediate levels of 5-HT and serotonin, so intermediate predisposition to such conditions as anxiety and depression. And he's got a predisposition to higher odds of autism. That's interesting. So despite being a sub-Saharan African, he's got some Eurasian predispositions, like the intermediate phenotype here for warrior versus warrior, definitely a very Eurasian result. And the higher odds of autism, that's also a very Eurasian result. That's not very common for sub-Saharan Africans to score that. So he's a little bit predisposed to autism as well. For lactose persistence, he's got higher odds of lactose intolerance, so he's definitely lactose intolerant. In fact, out of these eight variants, variants, he doesn't have a single variant for lactase persistence out of 8, so it's 0 out of 8 for lactase persistence for him. He's got a predisposition to average level of empathy, all right, based on OXTR genotypes. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 SNPs that went into this prediction for empathy. Okay, he doesn't carry any variants for hemochromatosis. For Alzheimer's, he was scoring very high for Alzheimer's, and we see that he's got a risk variance for Alzheimer's in APOE actually. So that's why he was scoring so high for Alzheimer's, because of the risk variance in APOE. He doesn't carry any risk variance for multiple sclerosis in the HLA gene, which is really good to see. And for the cardiovascular issues panel, he's scoring intermediate odds of cardiovascular issues. So we remember he was scoring low or below average odds for the risk of cardiovascular issues on the polygenic risk score page, and he's scoring intermediate odds of cardiovascular issues here. What that means is that on the homocysteine panel, the result must be lower. There must be lower odds of lower levels of homocysteine on the homocysteine panel. But we'll get to it when we get to it. He does have some risk variance in HLA for the vitiligo. Okay, and for facial morphology panel, well, that's very interesting. So he's got European genotype and EDAR here. He's got one European EDAR allele here, and he's got likely some East Asian facial traits, like most likely non-European ethnic background in this variation of EDAR. Definitely very interesting. So EDAR is a very interesting gene in terms of facial morphology. It's one of those genes where you can really tell apart Europeans from Africans from East Asians quite good. Most of the time, just by looking at EDAR genotypes, you can tell apart a European from an African from an East Asian. Most of the time, not every time, but most of the time you can determine the three races apart by just looking at EDAR genotypes. He's got a genotype for slightly shorter mid-face length. He's got a genotype for intermediate odds of protruding nasal bridge. He's got a genotype for larger nose size. He's got a genotype for nose drooping down, so lower nasolabial angle, and thinner eyebrows and intermediate eyebrow thickness. Okay. He does not have micropenis. He does not have micropenis here either. That's pretty cool. He's got a mix of muscle types, likely more sprinter rather than endurance athlete. Now that's quite uncommon for sub-Saharan Africans, because sub-Saharan Africans tend to have two sprinter alleles. For sub-Saharan Africans, it is a little bit not so much rare, but it is just it is like 60 to 35%, right? 60% have two sprinter alleles and 35% have the mix of muscle types result like this individual, right? So it's not so much rare, it's just kind of mm, secondary, right? The most common genotype in sub-Saharan Africans is sprinter, and this is like the second most common genotype. That's what I was trying to say. He's got a genotype for larger brain volume, which is a rare genotype. He likely has photic sneeze reflex, which is very, very interesting. And he's got one variant for increased pain sensitivity in SCN9A. Very cool. He's got one variant for pain hypersensitivity out of 10 total. By the way, this variant for pain sensitivity in SCN9A, it's most common in South Asians, so that's very interesting as well. He's got a risk. He's got increased risk of heart failure due to beta blocker medications. And let's see. Is there anything else we want to see here? He's got greater odds of cannabis-induced psychosis. He's got lower odds of meth-induced psychosis here, and he's got no protection from meth-induced psychosis here. There's too much stuff to talk about here. He doesn't have any albinism mutations, and he does not have. He is not a carrier for Melanesian blonde hair variants, but he does have a rare genotype that predisposes him to cleft lip. Now, in regards to familiar Mediterranean fever, he doesn't have any risk variants for that. No risk variants for familiar Mediterranean fever. And in the MCHFR panel, he's got good genotype here, normal homocysteine levels, but he does have this genotype right here in MCHFR, which leads to possibly impaired folate metabolism. So this is going to affect the MCHFR score quite a lot, but I do expect the CBS panel to be quite good. I do expect there to be a lot of genotypes that lead to lower levels of homocysteine, so we're going to find that out in a couple seconds. He's predisposed to intermediate or slightly higher odds of epithelial cancers based on 8q24. Let's check 8q24 genotypes real quick. Yeah, indeed. So there is quite a couple of variants, genotypes that lead to increased risk of prostate cancer and other cancers, bladder cancer, prostate cancer, one allele for cancer. So, but overall, it's still quite good. Overall, the result is still quite good, and he's not all that predisposed to epithelial cancers. Okay, for breast cancer, no risk variants here. That's pretty cool. For testicular cancer, he's got all these genotypes in KTLG that protect him from testicular cancer. I know this one genotype here says 3 times increased testicular cancer risk for men. It's 3 times increased relative to the genotype, relative to the non-risk genotype. But really, compared to the typical genotype for Europeans, it is 3 times decreased testicular risk, cancer risk for men. So all these genotypes lead to decreased risk of testicular cancer. This individual has definitely a decreased risk of testicular cancer based on his genotype in KTLG. For leukemia, he was scoring quite high, and he does not carry NQ01 alleles here, but he does carry NQ01 2 alleles here. Let's look at the rare disease and traits panel. I do want to get to the homocysteine panel quite quickly because I'm curious what it's gonna say. He doesn't carry anything. He does have a variant for. Yeah, he does have a variant for deafness. He has a genotype for increased risk of rheumatoid arthritis. Yeah, that's it. No risk variants for celiac disease, no risk variants for celiac disease in the HLA gene, which is really important. And he has this genotype in the AR gene that predisposes him to not going bald, which is really good to see, not losing his hair. And for the HIV and AIDS panel, he's got some protective variants from HIV. So protective variant here, and HLA-C. Pretty good stuff. He doesn't have any risk variants for Canavan syndrome. And for HLA gene panel, he is scoring actually intermediate or slightly higher odds of autoimmune disease, which is very, very interesting. Let's look at the HLA genotypes and check what contributed to the score. So let's look at the genotypes. So he's got this genotype in HLA-A, which is a bad genotype. He's got this genotype in HLA-A, which is also a bad genotype. He's got, let's see what else. HLA-B is looking all good. Everything here is good. HLA-C, this is bad, but everything else is good. HLA-D, I think this is a little bit bad. This is bad. This is bad. This is bad. Oh, this is really horrible. Okay, so this is a bad genotype right here. But everything else is looking good. So, I mean, there's not that many bad genotypes in HLA. So, overall, this results saying intermediate or slightly higher odds of autoimmune disease or lower odds of autoimmune disease. Overall, the result is okay. It's not horrible. And for homocysteine level panel, he is scoring indeed intermediate or lower levels of homocysteine, as I was expecting. Moving on, he's got a predisposition to intermediate or lower odds of obesity, which is really cool based on 1, 2, 3, basically 11 S&Ps here. And he's got a predisposition to lower odds of syncope based on 7 S&Ps. Now, for biotraits panel, one thing I really want to see is the hunter-gatherer CLTCL1 gene variant, and indeed he has 2 copies of the quote-unquote hunter-gatherer CLTCL1 gene variant. The reason it was called hunter-gatherer or farmer is because the researchers found that it might be beneficial to hunter-gatherers to have the hunter-gatherer gene variant, whereas it might be beneficial to people practicing farming or agriculture to carry the farmer gene variant. Now, whether or not the hunter-gatherer gene variant is most common in societies or cultures that actually practice hunting and gathering, I don't know. I really don't know. Um, I don't know if there's been research done into this topic. Maybe I need to do more research into that. But it looks like from what I've observed so far, I do notice a pattern that hunter-gatherer samples indeed tend to score more frequently tend to score hunter-gatherer CLTCL1 gene variants, whereas farming samples who are agricultural samples who are from an agricultural time period or who've been practicing agriculture for a while tend to score more frequently the farmer gene variant. I've noticed that. So maybe there's some truth, maybe there's even some correlation between the hunter-gatherer gene variant and CLTCL1 and actually practicing hunter-gatherer lifestyle, right? But it really has to do with the ability to process carbs and sugars in the diet. So people carrying the hunter-gatherer CLTCL1 gene variant, like this individual right here, has reduced Mota individual, has reduced ability to process carbs and sugars in the diet. And let's skip over that. For blood group panel, his blood type is most likely type B. Wow, that's very interesting, very exotic. Most common blood type worldwide is type O, but looks like for Mota Hunter Gatherer, the predicted blood type is indeed type B at 98% likelihood. Very, very interesting. Well, if you found this video to be entertaining, if you watched through the whole thing, wow, great attention span. But anyway, make sure you check out the description for useful links to buy the DNA sample that was analyzed in this video, the Mota DNA sample. I will leave a link to download it, to buy it on my PayHip in the description of this video. It's a very high quality file, so it's going to be probably quite expensive. Maybe I make it $5, maybe 4.5. I'm not sure. And also the links to buy my Trade Predictor executable and Trade Predictor reports, which allow you to generate, reports like this basically for a DNA file in microarray sequence format. So all those links will be in the description of the video. Make sure you check out the description. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.